So you don't see the current level of CO2, the rising of the CO2, wherever they come from, as a problem climate-wise?
That's right. I don't see that the cost of rising CO2 concentrations is that important. It's certainly the plant world loves it. And then you could also say there's something else that's involved here, and that is, what does that CO2 represent? That rising CO2 represents the fact people are living longer and better lives. And so that's a benefit, a huge benefit, that carbon energy has allowed people's lifespans and the quality of their life to increase dramatically in the last 100 years. At the same time, because of our wealth, we've been able to mitigate the damages and the deaths from climate events. You might have seen some of the charts that show deaths from climate events are down 95% in the past 100 years, because we are wealthier and use energy to protect ourselves from the climate variations.
And I guess 1 degree warmer climate will only benefit this growth, because it's easier to grow crops when it's warm than when it's cold.
Yes, when you do a full accounting of the benefits of extra CO2, you will find that you end up with a positive, that if you put more CO2 in the atmosphere, that actually makes the living standards of people rise even more and the biological world advance even more.
But is there a threshold, so to speak? Like, let's say, I don't know, it's CO2 level have been rising like 100 parts per million over the last 100 years or so. It doesn't seem like that extreme or so. But could it, in theory, trigger some kind of rapid warming if we release a huge amount of CO2 by burning all the fossil fuels or whatever? Could it do some damage, if you will?
Well, there are a lot of scary stories out there about if we reach some kind of tipping point. But it turns out that the way carbon dioxide acts in terms of a radiative gas, the amount of energy it absorbs and so on, decreases in terms of its incremental effect as more CO2 increases. So if you double CO2, there is one effect. If you double it again, that effect is less than half of what the first doubling was. So you have this approaching a limit of no more impact in terms of the climate with extra CO2. And these amounts of CO2 will always be below any kind of threshold that would cause it to be a pollution or problem. In fact, you can go into a lecture hall sometimes and take a CO2 monitor, and you will find it's 1,000 parts per million. So 1,000 parts per million is not a problem for life on Earth.
Do we know the threshold for where CO2 doesn't really do anything more, or is it still debatable?
That is debatable because of how these feedbacks work that I talked about. Because some people think that the feedbacks will always be positive, like adding extra water vapor and making the temperature go up and up. That's a positive feedback. We just don't know enough about how those feedbacks will happen, but we can look at the past and see that they happen very gradually, and that the atmosphere has negative feedbacks too. That the atmosphere has ways to shed that extra heat, and so that keeps the planet from shooting off into some kind of warm world.